Salut et bienvenue sur On peut le dire. This is the first episode. Exciting! This series will help you understand, practice and improve French pronunciation while hopefully having fun. Check out the links in the description for more resources and for the sources I've used to create this content. Today we're looking at a few definitions so that we know what we're talking about. C'est parti! First off, let's look at phonemes. A phoneme is the smallest unit of sound in a spoken word. It comes from the Greek word phonema, which means sound. Very, very bizarre. We are going to look at one example today. We're going to look at the greeting bonjour in French. So if we look at its phonemes, we have 5 phonemes in the word bonjour. We have b, on, j, ou, r. Bonjour. So when you string all 5 together, you have one lovely word. Okay, so 5 phonemes, 1 word. Now, every phoneme in a language can be represented by what we call a grapheme, and a grapheme is simply the written symbol that we use to represent a phoneme. Okay, so the written symbol of a phoneme. And grapheme comes from the Greek word graphema, which means letter. That all makes sense. So, the tricky bit in that is really well shown by the word bonjour, which is why I chose it. A grapheme could be a single letter, as in bonjour you have B, J and R. So we have one single letter, or here 3 single letters showing 3 associated phonemes. B for B, and J for J, and R for R in French. Okay? So a grapheme could be a single letter. But graphemes could also be a couple letters or even more than a couple letters strung together to create the symbol for one sound, one phoneme. In bonjour we have ON symbolizing on, one sound, 2 letters in the grapheme, and we have OU symbolizing ou, so again 2 letters symbolizing one phoneme. Okay? So letters and graphemes, not necessarily the same thing. There could be some overlapping, but not always, so bear that in mind. Okay? Now we're going to look at vowels and consonants, but we're going to look at vowel sounds and consonant sounds as opposed to letters. There will be or may be a distinction, so again, don't associate them automatically and think they're the same thing. So vowel sounds. Vowel sounds are sounds that we create when we allow the air to flow out of our mouth without any obstacle at all. So we call that technically completely opening the vocal tract and allowing air to flow out unobstructed, which just means there's no obstacle to the way the air comes out. That's for vowel sounds. You might have learnt about long and short vowels when you were at school, but that doesn't really apply in French. What we do instead is we will classify vowels by where they are pronounced in the mouth, and that will help us to graph them onto a 2-dimensional chart. We will graph them depending on their height, so whether it's an open or closed vowel, and their backness, so does it come from the front of your mouth or the back of your mouth. And so these are just 2 examples of vowel charts. We are going to get more familiar with these as we go forward. These 2 in particular can seem a little bit scary because they're full on and we don't really know what they're all about. But we will slowly build up from a blank one to understanding more about them. You can see, however, there's a lot of overlapping between the French vowel chart and the English vowel chart. So some sounds are similar and will be found again. So you don't have to worry too much about it. But anyway, this is just a little example to show you what it will look like eventually when we use them. As opposed to vowels, we also have consonant sounds, and you can probably guess by now, consonant sounds are where there is some obstacle to airflow. That obstacle could be your lips, obviously it's in your mouth, but it would be your lips, for example, if you are producing the phoneme m or b or p. Your lips are blocking the air. It could be your tongue as well, so if you are doing a l, for example, or k or g, your tongue is creating the obstacle. And these will be consonant sounds. Okay? So, the next definition for today is the International Phonetic Alphabet, which we cutely shortcut as IPA. And you've already seen a little bit of it here. You've seen a little bit of it in purple within these square brackets. That's my code. So the International Phonetic Alphabet is a standardized representation of spoken language or of sounds or of phonemes. So at some point, some professional linguists decided it would be a good idea to come up with a standard system so that learners of a foreign language knew what sound they were supposed to be creating without having to refer to an approximation in their own language. For example, I've seen some people write the sound B, which we use in the French alphabet, you know, A, B, C. I've seen people write that as AAH for R, and BEH for B, and CEH for C, which to me sounds a bit odd because it's not exactly right. And if you're a linguist, then you're a little bit bugged by details that we get wrong. So the International Phonetic Alphabet allows us to go past that by symbolizing specific phonemes in what we know is an accurate standard way. The problem with this for you at your level is that you might not be familiar with the IPA, and some of its symbols, for example this one, look like normal alphabet letters, so you might be tempted to pronounce this one, for example, U. However, a German person would be tempted to say, no, that's an U, and a French person would say, no, that's U. Well, actually here, in this case, this specific IPA symbol symbolizes the phoneme U, so the Germans would win. But there you go. That's just to demonstrate that when you see a purple letter with square brackets, then I'm using the International Phonetic Alphabet. And so we are going to introduce them little by little, not all at once, and you will get used to them. But bear in mind that they might not be the letter that they look like. They might not be the sound of the letter that they look like, if that makes sense. It will eventually. Don't worry about it too much. But yeah, purple square brackets, that's my IPA code. So these refer to phonemes, not graphemes, I guess is the bottom line. Okay? Next, monophthong, diphthong, triphthong. So mono, diph, and triph, Greek for 1, 2, 3, and thong coming from a Greek word which means sound. So when you have a monophthong, you only have one perceived vowel sound. For example, you could have the French connective e, that's just one sound. If you wanted to look at a diphthong, one I really like, just because I didn't really learn it in France, I only heard it in England, and it's a reflex now. I think it's your oi, you there. I find it hilarious, that one. That's a diphthong, because you start with an O and then it turns into e, oi. And then triphthongs, although there is a little bit of a debate going on among linguists about that one, but a maybe commonly accepted triphthong would be hour, like an hour, because you have an hour, 3 different sounds that kind of glide from the first to the second to the third. That's called a triphthong. In French, we have monophthongs. We have some diphthongs, but they're a little bit rarer, I would say. And then triphthongs, I can't really think of any, because what might look like one actually has a semi-consonant sound in the middle. So we won't really consider it a triphthong. But basically it's, do you have one vowel sound or 2 vowel sounds? Okay? Right, we're getting closer to the end now. I was going to say don't worry, you're probably not worried. Hopefully you're not bored. This is the most boring one, but afterwards will be more practical and more fun. Okay? So a little anatomy then. I will be using this sort of graph or an adaptation thereof repeatedly, just to help you visualize what's supposed to happen in your mouth and in your throat and maybe around your nose area. And in this one, what's particularly relevant for us, as in you British people learning French and me French teacher in Britain, I think is this part here, the soft palate or velum. And this is important because it helps us create the nasal vowel sounds. And that's a type of sound that you do not have in English, and that therefore a lot of British people struggle to produce. We have an opposition between oral vowel sounds and nasal vowel sounds. So when you're producing an oral vowel sound, the velum here raises, and so it blocks this airway, and so all the air is coming out through your mouth. That's why we call it oral. Okay, it's all coming out through your mouth. And if you are going to produce a nasal sound, then the soft palate here goes down, and therefore here we have a little bit of an opening, and so some air will still go out your mouth, but some air will also come out through your nose, and that's why we call it nasal. Okay, some of you have already done some experiments in class with me to practice that, and we'll do more in the future. But that's an important distinction in French. Another distinction we're going to look at in more details in the future is the vowel roundedness. So that's basically defined by your lips. Are your lips very close or very open, round or stretched? We're going to look at that in a little bit more details in the future. And finally, one last important characteristic of vowel sounds in French is it coming from the front of your mouth towards here, or the back of your mouth towards here. So on the two-dimensional vowel charts we saw earlier, these are the only two that are represented, vowel roundedness and front versus back. So the roundedness was going up and down, and front and back was going from side to side. And the nasal was not represented there, but it will be represented by some symbols in the IPA, which we are going to get more familiar with in the future. And this is it for our first video, with some definitions to agree with. So thank you for listening, and we'll have another one soon, hopefully, if I figure out how to make it all work and how to include proper videos into this. Ok, au revoir, et n'oubliez pas, on peut le dire.